collaborate. Basically, what people will hear is my wonderful radio voice. They won't hear Troy, and so on. All right. So keep writing in the chat box if you have anything to say for yourselves. Anyway, good to see you. We have 200 students enrolled in this unit. We've got 2 students online. That's very encouraging. So I'll tell you the good news. The good news is that I have run this class for 2 hours today on campus, and I hope I have saved every minute of it. So that's good news. And what I also wanted to do today is to answer some questions you might have, and also run a little bit the same class with you as I ran in Darwin, just to make sure that, like with 2 of you, I could run it a little bit differently and probably a bit faster. So if you go through it with me, it will give you a pretty good introduction to what happened in the classroom and on campus, pardon me, and also it will actually give you a good practice of how to work with the ideas we discuss on campus. Yeah. Well, you see, that's what happens. You've got to click in order to enter the room. You've got to click. The safest way is to click on the purple light. If you click anywhere else, you might end up somewhere else in the cyberspace. Meet bad men or bad women. God knows what can happen to you if you fall in a dark alley. Oh, cool. I could hear someone's mic. All right. So last week we have finished with the graph, right? We had this graph, and I have actually posted it on LearnLine on the discussion board, and we had from Maharana a lovely response to my question, and so that was last week or until today. So before I actually go on, I'll just leave it where we were a week ago. And do you have any questions, or do you want to say anything, or would you like me to just get on with it? No, Lian, I'm very happy. Just ask the questions and I'll tell you whether they will be answered throughout today or whether I need to think about them. Yeah. So you got worried. That's really good. that, that means we have to do some work. All right, Lian, what example did you give that then you got worried and you started backtracking? So what was the response you gave me? I couldn't, I've been teaching all day since this morning. Yeah, 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 absolutely. I played basketball, so I know exactly what you're saying. And so what made you worry? No, doesn't. No, doesn't. I mean, literacy is a skill or it's a tool we use to engage in a diversity of contexts. So it could be, you use literacy skills for professional reasons, you use them for personal reasons, you use them for hobbies. I can't even think of all the contexts in which we need literacy in order to, because we need to communicate and we live in a print culture. And by print culture, I don't mean necessarily that literacy involves text printed on on paper, but we have to be able to read and manage signs, either in order to communicate or keep and manage records. Pretty much almost in everything we do. I can't even think of an activity. Maybe sleeping doesn't require literacy skills. I don't know, maybe cleaning teeth doesn't require literacy skills. Someone could argue that you still have to read the world. So there, but we don't have to push it that far. But no, it was a good example. Doesn't have to be just professional life. All right, so what we did last week, I have come up with this model. The idea is as follows, and this is what we discussed today in classroom, on campus. So the idea is as follows. In assignment 1 and in assignment 2, you have to actually show uh, your capacity to think of literacy in a way that actually accounts for the complexity of skills that being literate actually involves. So even in your context of the empire, there are so many things you need to understand, and the ways in which you actually carry yourself as an empire, that basically it is not just a skill of whistling the button, whistling the whistle and blowing the whistle and all of that. As it is, as you said, it requires a dress code. It requires knowing how to be with people, and even if you were to engage with people in the context of actually negotiating the rules, probably doesn't have to be much, but even negotiating rules at the local level, because I know that there are some rules that people play by in sort of local regional levels, a context, and then differently probably on an international scale. So all of that requires communication and so on, and ways of actually being together. So we need to know expressions, and we don't learn them just from one context. So your mother first teaches you, or your parents teach you how to be polite, then you go to kindy, you learn, you expand your vocabulary and your behaviors and so on. So the way of how to be polite or pleasant, or how to make friends, you learn expressions, you learn how to write them. You know also that when you write to a principal and when you write in by hand, you don't write in the same way as you scribble for yourself a note on a piece of paper. You actually want to make your writing legible and so on. So there are lots of awarenesses that are involved. We can call them awarenesses or skills that are necessary for us to actually act in a literate way, which means in an informed way. Like literate means informed, and you can be less literate because you are less informed. So, and you will notice it very quickly when you see communication from people who are maybe less literate or less educated. You can see that the way they write is kind of simple. Even the way they think, sometimes they may think in quite abstract ways, but because they haven't been schooled in literacy very well, the way they articulate complex and abstract terms is poor. Um, Whereas, that doesn't mean that they didn't have they don't think abstractly, but just the way they express it. And some people actually don't think abstractly because they haven't had enough experience of engaging in context where actually proper expression and proper thinking required people to actually step back and think in an abstract way. I would just, because we are talking about abstraction and organization of information, I'll tell you what it means. Abstract, means encompassing a lot. That's what abstract means. Abstract term is a term that encompasses a lot. And even when we're actually looking at this graph right now on the screen, on collaborate screen, you can see that even in here, there is an order in the organization in this graph I produced. So there is something on the top, and there are lines that connect different rows. So you can see that even here, I have shown you how to think abstractly by linking particular things and not linking particular things, and by putting things, some of them on the top and some of them on the bottom. So that's what's called capacity to think abstractly. Can you organize things in such a way that actually they can be generative? They can make people think in, fill in slots in more than one way while still holding on to the structure. So the structure is abstract because it's powerful and you can put a lot of examples underneath, but the term itself is so abstract that therefore you could put under any of these terms which we have in those slots, examples from netball, examples from professional context, examples from LearnLine, as some people today did on campus. So that's what abstract means. Abstract means ordered and powerful enough to actually encompass quite a lot. So another example of abstract thinking could be theory. Even the word theory. Theory is a different word than to say table. Right? Theory is something that actually says we can actually think in a larger, more encompassing way about ways in which we act or interpret the world, because it's a term that actually allows us to explore lower level things and bring them together in the form of a theory. So we have abstract concept, but literate people can actually do that, can organize information properly and in a way where the structure is clear, where nobody gets lost and all of that. Less literate person doesn't have those tools. So the text is messy, is not organized, doesn't have headings. People can't. A lot of times when the text is well organized, people who are fluent in a particular context in which this text was written. So for example, when I read professional literature, a lot of text I can read very fast because I can actually see what the text is saying just by watching the structure of it. So that's possible because a text is actually written by a highly literate person. So what we want as teachers, we want to gradually increase those literacy skills in our students. That's the idea. The idea is to start from, whenever we start and finish whenever they finish. But the point real is that we cannot do it well unless we know what is involved in being literate. Typically we just say, oh, read and write, send out the words or send out the letters, or being able to, and then there's room for magic. Magic happens. What teachers say and the curriculum says understand the text, or they use the better word, which is more complicated, comprehend the text. And then of course when I go to meetings or lectures and then I ask people, what does it mean to comprehend? And that's when people get worried because nobody knows what it means to comprehend, but we all have to teach students to comprehend. Anyway, so you can see that the word comprehension is a theoretical word. So it cannot be just, we can't just teach children to comprehend. We actually have to ourselves know what it means. So that will come in another class, not necessarily today. But what today I wanted to say is that you cannot teach anyone the range of tools that students need in order to progress in their capacities to be literate people unless we actually know what's involved. We need to know what's involved in those, what tools are needed. So what I did using just the curriculum, in my latest publication, I have actually, which is still, it's a book. We have lots of publications in that book. And this is the chapter I produced with another. I think that's there. I don't know. I don't know where. I think it's in that publication. I produced so many things. I don't know what goes where. Anyway, it's my thing that I produced, and I did that because I wanted to actually use the curriculum, and by using the curriculum, I wanted to actually give us a representation of how to work with the curriculum, and through those tools that the curriculum offers, how to actually think about the skills that are needed for people to actually progress on, let's call it, along the literacy scale, from less literate to more literate. So we've got this table here, and I want to talk about it. Are you happy? Okay. Troy, in order for us to know you are happy, you have to type happy. Otherwise, it's just not, we don't have your consensus. We need to see you're actually there. Oh, good. And your example was based on an experience in a school working with, what is this SO? I know what it is. Is it something helping the teacher run the literacy program? What's this SSO? What is it? This is like social student support office. Okay, good. Okay, so what we did today in class, I put our students through an exercise of actually trying to uh, give me an example. So in groups, they sat together and they were trying to come to sort of understand these terms which are in the table and actually describe a context in which they use these literacy skills. Right, so they looked at these at the graph, and the question was, okay, using those terms which we have in this table or in this graph, how would you describe, could you think of some activity and give me examples from this activity how you actually drew on these capabilities and these different forms of capital in order to act as a literate person. And the idea is, in assignment 1, while you will answer the question, what is literacy, the second assessment criterion is for you to actually give me examples illustrating what makes you a literate person, right? Show us some of your literacy engagements. So typically what happens, I get less literate response from students. What I get is I do Facebook and I do LearnLine responses. Well, yes, so does my mother. Well, she doesn't go on LearnLine, but just about. So the question is now, how can you respond to the question about your literacy capacities or literacy engagement in a way which reflects that you are actually a literate person, and therefore you can do it in an academic way, not like a child, but in an academic way. So what I did, I created this graph to actually give you a structure in relation to which you could actually talk about your literacy experiences. So what we did in class today, we had some students came up with a particular activity. They chose the discussion board, not a very easy thing to actually respond, to actually use as an example. But anyway, they chose the discussion board, and we then analyzed what would a good and well-informed participation on the discussion board look like if you were to engage all these capabilities and all these different forms of capital. Now, before you get too confused, I might go to the next slide, and we could have a look what I mean by. So first of all, just to refresh your memory, the capabilities, this is what they mean. Personal, it's concerned with ideas about being and behaving and living with others, right? So the personal and social capability is largely, I talk about it in a two-way sort of relationship. Is what skills do you need, or what skills do you need in order not only to support um, yourself in being with people and therefore support other people, and also through your interactions with people learn about yourself, because other people are really a mirror to your own soul. So as you actually, through your literacy engagements, you expand yourself as a person who lives with other people. At the same time, these activities impact on the way you are, right? So you become more understanding, more empath. You actually acquire leadership skills. You know how to work with relationships and so on in order to actually get things done, as opposed to break things. So that's the social and personal capabilities. Then we have ethical and intercultural. I have actually I've got here on my computer also links direct to the curriculum, just in case we get into trouble and we need them. But basically, ethical understanding is concerned with acting in regards to others with notions of truth, justice, freedom, empathy, goodness. This is all from the curriculum. The intercultural understanding dimension is concerned with negotiating and mediating differences between identity and culture, as well as communicating, empathizing, and analyzing intercultural blah blah experiences critically. And then we have critical and creative. Now, when you actually work in the assignment, I don't want you to read the capabilities the way I read. I actually want you to actually read what's actually said and use these descriptors to talk about what actually a fully literate person would look like if they were, for example, engaging on Learn and in our discussions. Because, I mean, you don't have to use this one, but that's what we discussed in classroom because the students came up with the example. So we had all these capabilities today, and then we had also, what did we have? And then we also looked at what these capitals, different forms of capitals meant. I can see that Sophia made it. Yes, that's really good to see Sophia online. Anyway, so we looked at what these different capitals meant, and I have explained them, and they are on they will be uploaded today on YouTube. But basically, what social capital, what capital is basically what I have in class described in a very crude way. Capital is currency, right? That's what it is. The things that matter. But of course, I don't mean money, because when we communicate and build relationships with people, we don't uh, we don't have just one currency, not just money. We actually have social currency, symbolic currency, and educational currency. So, for example, when we interact with people, we want to call. We actually, when we interact with people, say in terms of a social capital, what we do, we are aware that we have a particular audience with which we interact, so whether it's one people or many people, and we also are aware that our audience is not constructed today. They come with a particular past, so we are aware of the kinds of people that we are um, engaging with. We are aware also of the kinds of networks and teams that will feed into our positive relationships. So basically, by capital, I mean what kind of networks or what kind of social networks are you engaging in your, or are you thinking of, or are you engaging when you actually interact with people? That's very important because, for example, now as I'm talking to you, I have a very specific social capital that I am actually having, or I have a very clear idea in terms of the social capital what I'm doing. And what I'm doing now is not only talking to you as students, but what I want to do is actually make you aware of what of the relevance of being part of a network of teachers and intellectuals and thinkers, of relevance of that job of being part of the larger network to your life as a person, and especially to your life as a professional, right? So when I talk to you, I talk to you by bringing all these references together and by making you feel that there is a value, that there is a value in actually seeing yourself as part of the greater network and also of joining those networks. Symbolic capital is the values on which we draw. And the values on which I draw at this very moment is being knowledgeable, professional, um, right, and concerned with, what do they call it? What do quality, with quality assurances processes, right? So basically about professional. So these are the values on which I draw. And in terms of the educational pardon me, in terms of the educational capital, I actually think that what not just my credentials and the credentials of the people that I draw on, but also things like um, um, the need for um, cross-disciplinary engagements or readings. A lot of my references that I draw on are actually to show you that I'm talking here in terms of social and personal capability, and in terms of so when I'm saying that it's very important that cross-disciplinary engagements are part of a sort of, but we belong to associations, or at least we are exposed to thoughts and ideas that are of cross-disciplinary character, that we don't only sit in rooms with educators, we actually watch what people do in sociology, psychology, and neuroscience, and teachers and some other people, because in order to grow our heads bigger, we actually have to expand the kind of networks or social networks with which we engage. So that's the educational capital. Educational capital is basically the credentials. So it's cross-disciplinarity, having titles, having a PhD, having specific academic expertise, all of that. So these are the sort of currencies that one can bring into the social and personal capability. They will be slightly different for ethical, and they'll be slightly different for creative and critical. Nevertheless, you can see that basically the notion of capital relates to the kinds of currencies. Now, there is nothing absolutely right about it. These are just tools that enable us to look at the concept of literacy from more than just one angle, if you see my point. So I'll just remove this reference here for a moment because we don't need to have it occupying our place. So is everybody aware of it? So basically, very often as a student, you think that oh my God, if I could remember all kinds of capitals that go under the social capability and all the kinds of capitals that go under creative and critical. There's no such thing. And even if there is, it doesn't matter. What I really want from you is to actually use these terms, social, symbolic, and educational, to help you to think of the, the requirements of the outcomes for each of those capabilities in in terms of this capital, because it allows you to actually organize your talk and your thinking about literacy, and therefore you are more systematic in your approach to literacy and literacy teaching. This all this work with this graph and with these concepts will pay off when we will be designing activities for teaching literacy in assignment 2. So what I suggest, we first actually exercise ourselves with those terms. We actually get acquainted with them. We actually think how to work with those terms, and then we will be pretty good for assignment, pretty well set up for assignment 2. Now, there's nothing special about these terms. These terms are from the curriculum. Cross-curricular priorities are in the curriculum. Capabilities are in the curriculum. So simply you can go, if you want an explanation of these things, you just go, for example, to here it's what I've opened is personal and social capability, and you can actually read what's involved. So when you actually engage in discussing any context of any activity and literacy activity from the perspective of the social and personal capabilities, you have all the descriptors there in the curriculum, and all you have to do is to use them to actually reflect how a particular activity from the perspective of this capability would look like for a very literate person. I'll just leave it here for a second just to gauge how you're going. Okay, so any comments until now? Exactly. And with each other, and with each other, and with each other. So for social and personal, it is basically the kinds of connections we make, and we engage and we make references to, and how it actually impacts on our own personal growth. So you on our personal growth, because as I said, that those social the let's think of the spiritual way of how people word it, that other people are a mirror to our own soul. So when we engage with other people, it actually impacts on us. That's why social and personal capabilities are stuck together, because these two work together. As you actually engage, as you actually on the discussion board, as we had here, where's discussion board here, literacy activity. So what we had was discussion board today. Someone came up with a discussion board, and what we were looking at is exactly, it's how that in the context of the postings, how did, in terms of a social capability, so let's have a look at the social capability with ideas. So it has to do with ideas about being and behaving, right? So people mention how they behaved and how they represented themselves on the on LearnLine. I mean, on the discussion board. Develop empathy, understand, and build. So what kinds of what kinds of behaviors, or what kinds of activities, how did they actually engage in those postings? What things did they do in order to argue that they were actually um, consistent with those outcomes in those capabilities? So build relationships, so build, understand and build relationships, whether they actually in the postings, as they actually are working constructively with the students, whether it actually is the aware, whether they are aware that their colleagues, the students or the peers who are today on LearnLine, just their colleagues and just their peer students, a peer group, in a year or two, they will be their reference group, they will be their colleagues, they will be working with them in associations, they will be probably doing projects together. They should actually. So exactly, how do students on LearnLine, as they engage in the discussions on the discussion board, what tools they use to actually express the connections, the need for connections, the understanding that there are associations, the understanding that these associations are for professional associations are out there, that they need to engage, that they need to actually be aware of them, how they actually, what terms do they use, and what activities and what terms, what are the ways in which they word their postings, to learn about empathy, to share empathy, to feel for people, and all of that. So that was one. And then we did, what did we do? So that was with and then you can actually go to the personal capability. So this one is personal and social. So you can actually manage how they manage themselves. How do you use LearnLine? How do you use discussion board to actually manage to support the sort of collaborative management of each other? And we do it in the way how people engage with each other on different threads in the discussion, and it's gonna only expand. I stressed it in the lecture on campus that you don't have to do all of these things yourself on LearnLine, but if you were to discuss what quality participation on a discussion board would look like, you then engage all these capabilities and then the capital in order to show what a literate person would look like. Not just a literate person, but the person who has lots of time on their hands as well. I mean, because these are quite expansive descriptions. Now, we don't use the discussion board in order to show how much you do, but in order to actually explore how much is involved, so that it gives us, oh my God, if I were to do ethical intercultural, then I would have to be bringing in somehow in my postings my understanding of the relevance of considering other people's cultures, other people's ways of being, other people's maybe even writing, the forms of writing, other people's ways of perceiving reality, ethical listening, and what is there. So you then actually look into the ethical um, capability and intercultural, and there are things like truth, justice, freedom, empathy, goodness. um, I've got some more actually. I have collected some more. I just wonder where I put them. Things like status, are you aware? So that would be personal and social. That would be personal and social, I think. Social, being concerned with things like status. That's again personal and social fairness. Are you, or maybe ethical? This one would be ethical actually. What structures, what activities, how do you organize your postings for you to sound to be fair, right? So do you just answer to one person, or do you actually spread your postings among other people, relating to others? That's also social and personal. You have a need for certainty. So what would it be? That would be ethical. You just make people actually feel that it's safe and it's okay to post on LearnLine, and nobody's gonna beat you up. So control would be also about control and a sense of autonomy. All these things actually come under resilience. So it's probably under personal and social. But yes, I am not saying that you have to do all of this on LearnLine, but what I'm saying is it's good to think of what literacy tools one would use if one were to unpack them in relation to all these categories. And the reason why I want you to do it is because once you actually go through this exercise of what it would mean to participate, for example, on a discussion board or in some other context in relation to all these categories, what it would take, so that when we will be discussing for assignment 2 how to create activities that support students' literacy skills, we would have gone already through the pain of thinking about what an literacy activity actually involves, but from the professional perspective, not from the perspective of anyone. This is us thinking, oh my God, so many aspects, creativity. How do I support people in? So, for example, when they think of creating a portfolio, what kinds of ideas did I actually post in order to support them in thinking differently? Critical capabilities. What I defined in classroom today, what I defined by critical capabilities is bringing references from different and ideas from different contexts and from different from different sources, right? So critical means actually gather many, assemble from a lot, but you can't assemble unless you actually have building blocks. So critical capabilities requires us to think of organizing our information in relation to many, because we can't be critical unless we have more than one, right? And being critical in terms of two is not enough. So, right? So critical capabilities involves, in terms, say, for example, of a discussion board activity, what it involves us to think about, do we actually bring lots of perspectives in, lots of perspectives from different contexts? Do we actually, in our portfolio, when we will be doing the portfolio, do we quote different people, different students, different authors, different ideas, right? What's the base in relation to which we build all these activities? And then again, is this actually enabling us to create social greater social awarenesses? What kind of educational capital do we draw on, from which fields? So that and symbolic capital, do we now actually, through this, we show that creative and critical, well, I don't know, for creative, for symbolic, what are the values for creative? Because symbolic has to do with values. So is it, do we have a range? Do we have a range that actually illustrates that we actually can work with multimedia in a interesting way, creative way, and right, so all these sort of things. As I said, there's nothing true about them, but these are just questions to ask ourselves as we actually describe literacy engagements. And before I asked you to ask me questions, I just wanted to say something. Now, as you can see, this doesn't make the answer this doesn't make your answer about examples of you being a literate person simple. It doesn't make them simple. So when the assignment says can you exemplify a context of your literacy engagements, now what I'm showing by giving you this graph, I'm giving you slots or a structure in relation to which you can actually exemplify. Now you can see that the structure allows you to build an argument. You know, I participate on a discussion board. Not all of this that I will describe actually I do, but for a literate person, I can imagine that the following ways of participation would be needed in order to show the range of capabilities involved. And here they are, and you describe them in relation to all these slots. Now you can see that this is actually teaching you to think in a structured way. So your responses to the assignment are not, and forgive me the word, I can't think of a better word, but that's what I mean actually. Your responses are not childish, they are not naive. They are now expanded, they have a structure. The structure relates to the curriculum. So what I'm actually doing is teaching you myself literacy skills. I'm teaching you academic skills. How do you actually answer a question in an academic way? Well, the way you do it, you have a structure, you have a framework. Your framework has to relate to something that actually matters, like the curriculum. And in relation to this framework, you produce examples. And now your argument will be educated. It will be learned. It will show a person who can look at the concept or an activity, literacy activity, in more than one way. They can stretch it, they can turn it around, and they can look from another angle at it. And that's lovely. And that's what makes an academic writing, right? A lot of times, students don't have a proper understanding what academic writing involves. And you will be teaching academic writing because even with 5-year-olds, you will be teaching them academic writing skills. And if I make you sensitive that part of or the core of an academic writing is actually to have a structure, then this awareness you can take to classroom even with 5 and 3-year-olds, and you will teach them to structure things, and then when they respond in relation to the structure. So everything looks neat and lovely, as opposed to chaotic, unlearned, uneducated, and lots of scribbles on paper. All right, so this is my story. Any questions or any comments would you like to share? Yes, yeah. Mm, yeah. Mm, mm. That's great. That's really great. Because that's what I look for. And just to be personal about the whole thing, I didn't teach like this, even not in the summer semester, because I did have a bit of different approach. I produced this framework, which you have now in front of you, only in February. But it dawned on me that if I want my students to actually respond in a way which is organized, I might teach you how to organize. And that's what we're doing, and that actually allows you to have a reference in relation to which you build your descriptions, as opposed to just write chaotically and whatever you feel and not being sure. Okay, any other? Lian, I appreciate your table so that it points in the direction. Yeah, yeah. Well, but that's what it is. Mm. Mm. Okay, well, I might leave it here before overdoing it. And I can't really think about it, what we will do next week. I'll have to think about it, how we actually align, collaborate next week with the assignment, and also with, I think we will look now in a greater, once you have these things in a bit more in your head, we might look at the practices of literacy, which is another criterion of the assignment. We might look at that from the perspective of this table and from the perspective of your experiences that you collect over the next week. I just want us to sort of have a bit of practice with the assignments, so that none of you is surprised with the expectations, and it also gives you some help. But I will think about it. Well, obviously, when you think of the when once you describe in this way your experiences as a literate person, your engagement as a literate person, obviously, your experiences then from, which is another question in the assignment, when you have to actually describe your experiences as a student or as a pre-service teacher, um, obviously you can now use the same, you can now compare whether this table, this graph would be your frame of reference for analyzing what happened to you when you were little, or what you see in classrooms, whether any of these things are actually in place every time you see a literacy unit being taught. Right, so you actually have some tools now. So when you see someone, like we had in class a student saying, what about reading to children? And then we looked at the activity of reading, but we didn't look, we sort of assessed it. We looked at an activity of reading to children, how much is involved actually in it, and we couldn't see much, right? So it cannot be just reading to children. An activity has to be richer in order for a number of things to be included so that children get a lot out of it, as opposed to fall asleep, because when you read, it's kind of rhythmic, and some people like me fall asleep. No, what I'm saying is it's the same graph. It will be, the assignment one asks you to first explain the literacy concept, which we did a week ago. And then it says to you to reflect on yourself, on your own engagement in literacy context. So describe what makes you a literate person, something to this effect. And then another question in it is, or another criterion, because assessment one has different assessment criteria, and another one is to actually reflect on the teaching of literacy in schools, either as it is now or as it was when you were little. And what I'm saying is you can actually use this graph as a reference framework for discussing how it was done when you were little or how it is done today, right? And so basically it's the same graph, but now used not to reflect on yourself as a literate person, but how literacy is being taught. So gradually we work with these concepts, you know, again and again and again, until they we become really fluent with them. And you come to the class, you instantly will see what people do. Instantly, it will not, you will not be swayed. Oh, this is really nice. People were smiling, right? You will walk into the class and you will see what's happening. You will see whether people are actually engaging concepts of ethics and concept of intercultural knowledges, and whether children are actually engaged in a creative and critical activity, or they're just sitting there and playing but without any creative engagement. And whether their social skills are being, whether they engage in literacy in a way that actually their social skills are supported and their personal skills are supported, or whether they just go through the activities, right? So all of that, you would be able, if once we actually work from different angles with this framework here, like just like today, but then next week maybe by looking at different traditions in which we were schooled or which we actually see today in schools. So we'll get so much practice at this figure, at this table, with this table, that when actually in a few weeks time you go on prac and you see other teachers do it, you instantly know. You walk into the class and you will know what's happening or what's not happening. And that's experience. Informed experience. Yeah. All right. Well, nice to have you here. Thank you for making it. And this will be online within an hour. It probably will take an hour or half an hour. I don't know how long it will take to upload on YouTube. Okay. And all the lectures, collaborate lectures and so on are announced on the announcements. And they also, the links to them are also on LearnLine in the discussion board in the forum called On Campus Lectures and Collaborate Sessions. That's very funny. Okay, thank you. And back hello to Al as well. She's amazing. She does an amazing job. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Thank you for making it.